Today is October 4th, 2020, and you're watching Horseshoe Politics. The COVID-19 pandemic, it has been going on for many months now. The virus first spread to humans in China around late 2019, and then in December of 2019, it apparently spread to a few people in Wuhan, China. And then after that, it started spreading to other countries in the beginning of January. And then on January 20th, 2020, that's when the first COVID case in the United States was reported. And it was in someone who had traveled to Wuhan, China for the holidays. But then when they came back to the US, they had carried the virus with them. And then over the next month until end of February, there were like 20 other cases reported throughout the country. But then starting in the end of February, that number started to skyrocket to like around 1,000 by beginning of March. Within the first week of March, there was like 1,000 cases, and then March is when it completely got out of control. By the end of March, there was already 250,000 cases, and from there, it did not slow down. And that's what I want to talk about in this video: how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the United States, and I would like to talk about what I call the third wave of this pandemic, specifically in the United States. So yeah, this video will be more US centric. I mean, most of my videos have been US centric. If you haven't seen any of my other videos, most of them have been talking about the 2020 presidential election, or at least some factor related to that. But this video isn't really going to be very related to politics. It's more going to be related specifically to this pandemic and how it's going to progress. So really, this is not as much of a political video as my other videos. It's more of just a scientific video, I'd guess. But it's just giving my thoughts on how I think this pandemic is going to further affect the United States besides how it already has affected it so far. But let's look at the numbers first. In the entire world, first, we have 35 million cases, and we just recently hit 1 million deaths, which is very unfortunate. The fact that already a million, using the M word, a million people have succumbed to this virus, that just shows how widespread it has been, as well as how deadly it has been. Now we have here some other stats. 27 million of the cases have either resulted in recoveries or in deaths. Most of them recoveries, thankfully, but unfortunately around a million were deaths. But now you have 7 million cases that are still active. And here you can look at the daily cases, daily deaths. So I'm not sure if people know this, but as of now, we actually have the most amount of daily cases out of any time in this pandemic. Like in April and May, it was only around 100, less than 100K per day, but now it's around 300K per day because it slowly got more and more per day. But the deaths, on the other hand, the death count now is actually less than what it was back in middle of April. Back in middle of April, it was around 7.5 thousand deaths per day, but now it's around 5,000 deaths per day, which is still really tragic. I wish nobody died from this virus, but until there's a vaccine that's created and is spread to like 70% of the population, this pandemic won't be able to come to an end. So we're gonna have to wait until at least middle of next year for that to happen. But until then, I'm gonna keep talking about how badly this virus has spread, because I think people deserve to know. Now that we've looked at the worldwide stats, let's look specifically at the United States. The United States has approximately 20% of the worldwide cases, which is pretty bad considering that the United States only has 4 to 5% of the world population. 7 million over 35 million, that's around 20%. We also have around 20% of the world's deaths. We have 200,000 deaths over 1 million, which is the entire world. That's also really unfortunate. The fact that we have 20% of the world's cases as well as deaths. 214,000, this is no small number at all. Just shows how deadly this virus is. The fact that it's already killed a fifth of a million of our citizens or of our people living in our country, that's just really tragic. And I really hope this number doesn't go up much more, but there are pretty gloomy reports saying that by the end of this year, this number will reach 400,000. I really hope it doesn't reach that number. I really hope it only reaches like maybe 300,000 or even less. I mean, ideally, you'd have no more deaths, but that's definitely not going to happen, so we just have to see what happens from here on out. But let me get to the point, what the main point of this video is. I would like to talk about what I call the third wave of this pandemic that I think is about to happen, specifically in the United States. I think the United States is about to have its third wave. Now, I know officially most credible scientists have said that we're still deep into the first wave. Really hasn't been like a second wave or anything, but what I'm looking at is the graph of the daily case and daily deaths. Like, the definition of a wave is really subjective. There's no like specific criteria that anybody has assigned for designating a certain period of time as a wave of COVID or a wave of a pandemic. So it's really subjective. It's just based on the interpretation of people. So really, I'm not really going against any scientific consensus because the definition of a wave is completely subjective. If someone says that this is a wave, someone else says that it isn't. There's not really any specific way to resolve the dispute. It's just my opinion mainly, but I think that we're about to enter the third wave of the pandemic. The first wave was in the spring, I would say, right here. Its peak was in early April, and this wave largely hit the northeastern states of the US. It hit states like New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Rhode Island, Connecticut. All those states, those were the states hit most badly by the first wave. And you see here there was a spike around early April, and then throughout April and May, it gradually started to improve for the country as a whole. This is the first wave I would consider. Technically, this whole thing is considered the first wave by many scientists. This whole, like, everything up until now is the first wave, but that's not what I would say. That's not what I'm calling it. I'm calling just this part the first wave. But now we're going to get to what I call the second wave, this bigger spike. So, up until early June, it seemed like we were really getting things under control with this pandemic. But then, out of nowhere, we just suddenly start spiking again in the middle of the summer, starting in the end of June and then throughout July. And then it starts to cool down, it starts to get better in August. But this is what I would call the second wave of this pandemic in the States specifically. Unlike the first wave, this wave largely hit southern states, not just one coast or the other, but both eastern and western coast states of the South. So anywhere from California to Florida. So this would include states like California, Arizona, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. All these states, these were affected badly by this second wave, I would call it. And the second wave, because I think it affected more states than the first wave, you have an overall higher amount of daily cases at the peak of the second wave, which took place in middle of July, than in the first wave, which took place in April. But ever since the second wave peaked in July, it has started cooling down. It has started improving. Throughout August and September, it got better, but now you're sort of starting to see it level off here. And in fact, it kind of looks like it's starting to get worse here as I speak now on October 4th, 2020. So what I'm thinking is that there might be one more wave, at least one more wave of this pandemic in the US, but it's going to affect a different set of states than either of the previous waves. Now, one of the reasons why I really think that my hypothesis has a lot of evidence to back it up, if you look at states such as Wisconsin especially, whenever I looked at the Wisconsin daily cases, that's when I really had a good idea of how bad this virus still is in the United States. If you go to Wisconsin, if it'll load now, that is, but you will see a giant spike for the daily case count in Wisconsin in the last couple weeks as I speak. So here's the daily case count over time. Over here, you have not that many cases in like the spring time of the year. You have like April, May, you only have a few hundred cases per year. Then it gets slightly worse in the summer. So here was the first wave, while in the summer this was the second wave. So Wisconsin got hit a bit more harshly by the second wave, but not as badly as other states, I would say. But now here is what I would say is the third wave. Over here, this is when COVID started getting really bad for Wisconsin. Starting in middle of September, the daily number of cases skyrocketed for Wisconsin. And now it's at an all-time high for the state of Wisconsin. There's a few other states you could look at where there's a similar story. I think Indiana might be one of them. It's also near Wisconsin. And so if the first wave affected northeastern states, the second wave affected southern states, then the third wave is affecting midwestern states more badly than any other region of the country. If you look at Indiana, see, here's the first wave. The state got hit kind of badly, then it cooled off a bit. Then in the summer, it got hit kind of badly by the second wave, then it cooled off. But here, just last week, not even last week, just a couple days ago, you have the spike here, where it reached over 1,000 cases per day for October 2nd and 3rd. And then October 4th, which is today, apparently, it also reached over 1,000 cases per day. And if you look at this graph, that's basically an all-time high for the state of Indiana throughout this entire pandemic. Except this one outlier in August, it basically reached an all-time high daily case count for Indiana in the last few days. So states like Indiana, Wisconsin, they're getting hit really badly by this, what I would call third wave. This is not at all an official term, it's just something that I speculated, that I hypothesized, that we're starting to experience a third wave of this pandemic. So what I would expect is that the number of daily cases for the United States, number of daily COVID cases, it's not going to go down much more. It'll either level out to what it currently is right now and it'll stay like that, or it'll start to spike a bit. Here's the thing though, I don't think that it'll spike as much as it did in the summer, and here's why. Most of the states getting hit by this, what I call third wave, they're smaller states like North Dakota, South Dakota, and Indiana. These states don't have that many people, but when the first wave hit, you had states like New York with 20 million people getting hit badly, and with the second wave, you had states like California and Texas, each having over 20 million people. Those both of those states got hit really badly, and the combination of Texas and California having their own spikes, I think that's what really contributed to the giant national spike back in the summer. But now that both of those states have really gotten better since the summer, that's why the overall national numbers are doing a lot better now. But now you have states like North Dakota and South Dakota, which are also in that general Midwestern area of the country. You have those states having giant spikes now that only started in like around September, early September, I would say, or even late August maybe. But yeah, see, in the spring and summer, the Dakotas were doing really well with the virus, but then starting in August and September, things started getting out of control. And these Midwestern states is what I would call the third wave. What I would call the states getting hit the most badly by the third wave. You might have a few other states here and there outside of the Midwestern area getting hit by this third wave, I would call it, but the states getting hit the most badly are the Midwestern states by this wave, I would say. The other reason why I think that there's a really big wave going on now, especially in these Midwestern states and even other states across the country, it's because you have schools reopening now. You have schools all across the country reopening for the fall, and many of them are not able to properly impose social distancing measures, or they're not able to properly enforce mask wearing. So a lot of these schools, they just gave up on enforcing students to wear their masks. And because of that, you have COVID spreading all over the school. And also, in fact, many of these schools still have all these extracurricular activities like football games, basketball games, which can easily cause the spread of COVID, especially if you're allowing an audience to watch the football games or the basketball games and you're not even requiring them to wear a mask. I think that's one of the big reasons why COVID is spreading more now than in the summer, because you have school starting. But that's definitely not the only reason. You might have Labor Day contributing to that a bit, even though that's now a few weeks in the past. So probably if there's a spike that's about to happen, it wouldn't be caused by Labor Day, but it would be caused more by school reopening and maybe even like restaurants, or not just restaurants, but businesses as a whole being allowed to like reopen now. I know some states, they're allowing full capacity in their indoor dining restaurants. So they don't, because most states in the past few months, they had to restrict the amount of people that were allowed in places like indoor dining. So like in the past, it was like 50% capacity, but now many of these states, they're now allowing full capacity for indoor dining. The problem with indoor dining is the fact that you can't really wear your mask while you're eating, and the virus spreads easily indoors. So if people aren't wearing their mask indoors while they eat, then the virus has a really easy time spreading from person to person within the restaurant. My advice would still be to, if you're not going to completely ban indoor eating, in my opinion, that would be the best option, because you can still do you can still do takeouts, or you can still do drive-throughs, and the business owners aren't going to lose any money through that. But if you're going to do indoor dining, you at least need to restrict the capacity to around like 50%. That's the best way to make sure that the virus doesn't spread from person to person easily, because the virus does spread more easily indoors than outdoors. And when people aren't wearing a mask because they have to eat indoors, that's a really good opportunity for the virus to spread from person to person. So I'm thinking that in the upcoming weeks, you might have like a slight uptick in the number of daily cases in the United States because of states like Wisconsin, Indiana, and the Dakotas, but I cannot predict the future. I might be completely wrong on this. You might have the cases continue to go down nationwide for the United States, and that would be amazing. I hope that happens, but we have to see. This election's in a month. This month is going to be a really intense month, for the better, for the worse. Probably for the worse, to be honest. Trump still has COVID. That's not a good thing. Hopefully he recovers soon, but we just have to see. I think this is all I have to say for this video, and I hope you watch tomorrow's video. See you then.